Welcome to Tejal Khandelwal Study Center. Today's topic is Western Political Thought, Antonio Gramsci. So let's revise Gramsci together. Gramsci was born in a very poor family in Italy, in Sardinia. He was attracted to Marxist idea when he was at the university and he got associated with the Italian Socialist Party. When the Italian Communist Party was formed in 1921, he became a founder member and the General Secretary of the Italian Communist Party. He was a vocal critic of Benito Mussolini and fascism, and he was imprisoned in 1926, where he lived until he died. So we can say that Gramsci was a radical generalist, a socialist activist, and a revolutionary thinker. Gramsci is also known as the founder of neo-Marxism because he makes a break from the economic determinism of the Marxist thought. And he emphasizes the importance of thought and culture in the development of history. While he was in the prison, he wrote the Prison Notebooks, which is a comprehensive and voluminous in nature. In the Prison Notebooks, he talks about the concept of hegemony, the rejection of economic determinism of Marx, and the basis of hegemony is the importance that he gives to civil society, the importance that he gives to ideology and culture in the shaping of ideas and developing consent through which rule is done by the bourgeoisie. In The Modern Prince, what is the Modern Prince? The Modern Prince is work where he feels that the Communist Party should act like an advisory which will bring the proletarian consciousness. Because Marxist thought have not led to automatic consciousness in the proletariat class, it is the Communist Party who has the role of uniting the popular currents within the Italian national life. Now let's look at the influences of Gramsci. Obviously, since he was attracted to Marx and Marxist ideas, Marx has had a very strong impact on Gramsci's thought. So, the concern for the conditions of the working class that Marx had and primacy to economic factors is even shared by Gramsci. So, even if he says that primacy of economic factors cannot be overlooked, what Marx overlooked was culture and thought in the development of history, on which Gramsci will emphasize. He is also inspired by Hegel, where he talks about the concept of consciousness. Hegel emphasizes on the importance of idea, on the importance of how thought or consciousness is developed. And the same is being emphasized even by Gramsci. That's why how the nature of civil society, how there is a negative connotation that has been associated in Hegel's work. Similar kind of emphasis has been there in Gramsci's ideas. He is very much inspired by Benedetto Croce, who actually emphasizes the significance of culture in the formation of history. And from Croce that we see, we see that he emphasizes on the importance of ideology, culture, and intellectual processes which are important in the development of domination of the bourgeoisie class. What about the methodology of Gramsci? So, Marx says that any theory should always be guided by a program of action. Gramsci also emphasizes on praxis. But which aspect does he consider as praxis? he considers Marxism as a praxis. According to him, Marxism is guided by theory as well as a revolutionary program of action. And according to Gramsci, the historical materialist interpretation, the historical materialism of Marx itself traces as well as provide solutions about what should be the future of society. So, for Gramsci, the true praxis is Marxism itself. So, what has been the purpose of Gramsci? Gramsci wants to analyze that what have been the factors that had been overlooked by Marx, due to which many of his predictions have not come true. Thus, he analyzes the reason and the limitations that were missed by Marx. And he takes into factors culture, thought, ideology also as important. Wherein Marx says that superstructure is merely a reflection of the base. Gramsci says this is a key limitation. In fact, it is the role of superstructure which has acquired an independent characteristics, and it also plays an important role in the shaping of ideas by the bourgeoisie of the larger sections of society. So, just like bourgeoisie use ideology, just like bourgeoisie use the state, and they use culture, and they use intellectuals, and in the sphere of civil society that they shape ideas, a similar counter hegemony has to be built in the superstructure even by the proletariat class. Only then there can be a counter-revolutionary ideology that will be able to come. Okay? A counter-hegemonic ideology that will be able to come and develop. So, he says that Marx overlooked culture and emphasizes on the importance of culture. Marxism says, he says Marxism should not be merely about crude economic determinism, and there is a key inspiration and influence of Gramsci's thought on the later Marxist. Now let's see what is the difference between Marx and Gramsci. So Marx says that the base is the economic base, the mode of production, and the superstructure is the legal, political, cultural, religious sphere, which is merely a true reflection of the relations of production and the conflicting classes that we see in the base. And there is no autonomy of this structure, which means it is the matter and the material aspect which shapes the mind. And for him, mind is secondary for Marx. However, Gramsci says no, it is not only the economic domination or the means of production's domination, but it is also domination of ideas. And because of domination of ideas, the bourgeoisie is able to establish its hegemony. Fine? Now, so therefore, for Marx, power in base, we need to change only in base. And superstructure did not deserve an independent analysis in Marxist thought. And an independent analysis for the superstructure has been given in Gramscian perspective. That's why Gramsci is called as the theoretician of superstructures. So Gramsci says, ruling class dominates in diverse ways. It is through force, it is through consent, it is through economic power. And there are different structures for every way of domination. So, economic power is there in the base. Consent is generated in the civil society through ideas. And force or coercion happens through the state and its machinery, like the police, like the bureaucracy, like the military. So state, the bourgeoisie dominates the state also, and the civil society also. So here, if consent is generated for their rule through shaping of ideas, thought process, their way of looking at things, then sometimes there is no need to even use force for that matter. It is only by making a manufactured consent or generating legitimacy for their rule that the bourgeois will be easily able to dominate the society. So when the proletariat want to fight or overthrow the bourgeoisie, they cannot only be challenging at the economic level. They need to build counter hegemony even at the civil society level, right? And that's how change will come. So he gives importance to superstructure, which Marx never gave. Okay? Now, so according to Gramsci, superstructure has acquired a degree of autonomy. So, according to him, what are the levels of superstructure? He calls it the political society or the state. Okay? And the state rules through domination, coercion, or force. And it also has its own machinery like military, police, and bureaucracy, political parties. Okay? And the civil society is used for consent and legitimation. So, civil society is the structure of legitimation, and political society is the structure of coercion or domination. So, hegemony is created at the level of civil society and domination occurs through the political society or state. So, his concept of state is not restricted only in this political society or state. He calls it as an integral state. What is integral state? Which means he says state rules through its domination, coercion, force, and state rules through the consent and legitimation structure, that is civil society. Okay. So then he will distinguish between the nature of civil society and state relationship, which we will also analyze today. Now, what is hegemony and how hegemony differs from domination in Gramsci's idea? So, domination implies exercise of absolute control by the state. It is subjugation. It uses coercion. It uses force. On the other hand, hegemony implies ruling by influence, ruling by consent, ruling by patronage, and ruling by leadership. Okay? So, you create such a kind of an environment in the societal sphere where whatever are the bourgeois ideas, they are not only dominating ideas, they become common sense, which means if it becomes common sense and it becomes part of man's life, then it will be very difficult for this common sense to be challenged by the masses. Okay? So, hegemony happens in which sphere? Hegemony happens in the cultural sphere. So, his aspect of hegemony is what? Culture. So, culture is an important way of domination. Now, where we can see it today, like soft power is an important means of domination. So, Chinese propagate Confucianism. USA promotes its own liberal culture. India uses various aspects of pluralism like Buddhism, Hindu philosophy, Jaina philosophy, yoga. These are also the instruments through which India seeks to also establish its influence in the world. However, when we look at soft power at an international level, it is little different than the hegemony that Gramsci is talking about, because every aspect of soft power is not necessarily to establish hegemony. There is also a set of soft power which has its natural credential, and it is not necessarily in order to give it a strategic aspect. Okay. Now, so it is consensual domination. All right. So domination, one is by force and coercion, which we see in the structure of domination, that is the state with its machinery. And the other is the cultural sphere, the sphere of civil society, where religion, values, ideas, ideals, ideology are the key instruments. Okay. So, consensual domination is a form of control exercised by which class? By the bourgeoisie or the dominant class. It is which aspect, which hegemony? Because ruled by consent, it is cultural hegemony. That is his most nuanced and original contribution. Okay, so he says rule by consent or influence or patronage or leadership. Okay, now state and the ruling capitalist class both together. Okay, so it is not that the capitalist class is operating independently, it is always in combination. That's why the concept of integral state, hai na? So the state and the ruling capitalist class, they use cultural institutions to maintain power in the capitalist societies, and they establish a hegemonic culture which becomes common sense, which becomes a way of life and therefore difficult to be challenged. So the values and norms become common sense and it maintains the status quo and difficult to change this status quo. Sustain the position of the ruling class. How? This hegemonic culture that Gramsci is talking of. Now, how hegemony is exercised? So, like Hegel, he is inspired by the concept of consciousness. So, we cannot ignore consciousness. Wherein Marx says that it is matter which is primary and mind is secondary, or consciousness is secondary, which means the matter determines your consciousness. Okay? And it is not vice versa. It is not your consciousness which determines your material condition. But Gramsci says no, it is in fact even the ideas that have been imbibed in you will shape whether you accept the material conditions or whether you challenge the material conditions. If you feel that, consciousness is shaped, or the ideology of the liberal sphere becomes like this is a era of competition, and if the proletariat is not able to compete, they do not have enough merit. That is why they are laborers and the others are capitalists. So then they will start to accept this as a way of their life and not question it. So yes, according to Gramsci, forms of consciousness play a key role. Institutions who develop this also play a key role. So there is school, there is colleges, there is universities, there are church, all of this, okay? And the political and cultural practices are also how hegemony is being exercised, all right? So it is conscious political action and organization by the ruling class along with the state which do this, okay? So his contribution towards hegemony is a very unique idea. So he says hegemony is the organization of consent, okay? So it is through this way that he emphasizes. Now, importance that he is giving to intellectuals. So before we move towards his concept of intellectuals, let's just understand something. So we all do a lot of activities in our life. These activities are either manual or intellectual, which means, for example, if I'm doing my household work, it is a manual activity. And if I'm doing academic analysis, then it is intellectual work. Okay. So there is nothing like non-intellectual. which means even when I'm doing my manual work, I'm using my brain, right? My brain is functioning. I don't blindly just do anything. Otherwise, I will become a Cinderella and I will just mess around with all the household things, break things. So even in household work, there is some sort of mind that has to be applied while performing that action. Okay. But not every activity in our society is considered as an intellectual activity. So if I apply my mind also, it is not necessarily I perform the function of an intellectual. Okay. So for example, who is termed as an intellectual? So there is a distinction that Gramsci makes. So he says, one are the traditional intellectuals, the writers, authors, okay, and they are not associated with any particular class. According to Gramsci, it is their assumption that they believe that they are not associated with any class. On the other hand, he says there are organic intellectuals, which means organic intellectuals are those who will be associated with a particular class, propagate the ideas of that particular class. For example, if John Locke is the father of liberalism, which means in a way he is propagating the key ideas of liberal philosophy and giving support to capitalist ideas in Europe in the period he was writing. Okay. So he says organic intellectuals are those who are associated with a particular class. And traditional intellectuals are the ones who are considered as contributors in societies, like writers are there, authors are there, So activists are there, right? So they all perform without being attached to a class. But Gramsci says it is not so. Organic intellectuals even bring the traditional intellectuals within their fold and influence them also to be associated without their realization. And what about the organic intellectuals? The organic intellectuals belong to both classes, which means if the bourgeoisie have their own organic intellectuals who propagate the ideology and establish the cultural hegemony of the bourgeoisie, even the proletariat should have their own set of intellectuals, organic intellectuals, who establish counter hegemony to this dominant cultural hegemony that is being built by organic intellectuals of the capitalist class. And what about the capitalist himself? So Gramsci says the capitalist himself is an intellectual because he has the capacity to organize. He has a working mind and he is able to exercise leadership and he has the capacity to organize, and that is why they are able to rule. So he talks of intellectuals in this sense. Since this idea is very important, I will talk about certain statements which you will necessarily have to use in your exam. Okay? Now, let's just see quickly. So, he says every activity can be either manual or intellectual. There is nothing like non-intellectual. Otherwise, we will become what? Cinderellas. Fine. But only some practices are termed as intellectual. Okay? Others are common sense or practical knowledge. Fine. Now, so organic intellectuals do the articulation of ideology and they have allegiance to a hegemonic class. And traditional intellectuals are intellectual in general. So, authors, writers, artists, okay. Think that they are autonomous, but nobody is autonomous. Let's see how he justifies it. So he says the intellectuals are the dominant groups, Which term you have to use? Intellectuals are the dominant groups. They are the deputies exercising the subaltern function of social hegemony and political government. Okay, so they are associated to the state as well as to the sphere of civil society. Now, so subaltern means any low rank person or group of people who in particular are of a lower rank. Okay. So when we use the term subaltern, which means you are denying them the voice in making of policy, local history, their culture. So you don't give them importance. That's why it is known as subaltern. Okay. Now, second important statement on intellectuals, he says, there is nothing like an independent class of intellectual, which means there is nothing like traditional intellectuals. The term intellectual can never be independent. Intellectual, according to him, are only always associated with a class. So he says an independent class of intellectuals does not exist, but rather every social group has its own intellectuals, which means be it the proletariat, be it people from any religious sphere, be it the ruling class also, the capitalist class, sorry. A human mass, he says, does not distinguish itself and become independent by itself without organizing itself, and there is no organization without it. Matlab, ye intellectuals are the only one who organize ideas and articulate ideology. Without them, organization cannot happen, because if you want to do organization, when you want to mobilize people, you want to bring people around something, there has to be an idea, and you have to make that idea imbibed or imbued within that masses. So if I want to propagate one particular religious idea, then I have to ensure and organize people around that religious belief. Then I have to use my brain on how I will put my religious idea into their mind, how I will shape them to believe my belief as their own and become organized around that religious idea. Okay. So he says there cannot be any organization. Organization does not mean literal institution. Organization means mobilizing people together around something. Okay. So there cannot be organization in society without intellectuals. And according to him, there is nothing like an independent class of intellectuals. Every social group has their set of intellectuals. Okay. Now, he say, all men are intellectuals, but not all men in the society have the function of intellectuals, which means that there can be authors, writers, artists who are intellectual, but we don't give them that status of intellectual, because not necessarily all of them are performing the task of organization. They might give an idea, they might articulate something, but not necessarily they will be able to organize. It is this leadership that an intellectual has to mobilize, designates them as intellectual in true sense according to GRAMSCI. Okay? Now, civil society, he says, is precisely the special field of action of the intellectuals. So, like the Communist Party, also the function he enshrines, these intellectuals of the Communist Party shape the ideology of the Communist Party and mobilize proletarian consciousness to challenge the hegemony that has been built by the bourgeoisie and the ruling class together. Means the state together. Sorry, not the ruling class, the state and the ruling capitalist class. Okay? Now, so technical workers, supervisors are the organic intellectuals of whom? Of the proletariat. Okay? Because they understand what are the issues in the working of capitalism and mode of production. Now, so let's understand what he talks about civil society. Now, whenever all of you hear any term, you all have a natural tendency to associate the term only in the modern age or in the contemporary usage as you have understood it. But every term and its meaning has to be associated with its origin first and its usage today. So, for example, when we understand civil society today, it is a group of voluntary organizations, associations, NGOs, voluntary groups, self-help groups that you associate civil society with. So, it is because in the modern parlance today, civil society has been understood like this, but not necessarily in its origin. So, we know that Hegel uses civil society as a sphere of universal egoism, right? And family as, there is element of sacrifice that is there. But when everybody comes in civil society in Hegelian terms, he associates with the selfish needs of man. Okay? So, if we talk of liberal idea, civil society is like a sphere of freedom, which means if we have an active civil society, which means the state there can always be challenge, there can always be, right to dissent within the civil society. That is how liberals understand. Because they always talk of what? They will talk of constitutional government, limited government, and there always has to be check and balances. So we need a very active citizenry and a very active civil society, and how much rights people enjoy in this public sphere, that is what will show the extent of, liberty that is being offered by the state to the individual. ठीक है? So for them, in the liberal sense, civil society ज़्यादा freedom है तो ज़्यादा अच्छी बात है. Okay? But Gramsci gives what kind of connotation? So Gramsci says it is in the civil society which is like a buffer. Why it is like a buffer? Which means civil society acts like a protection shield for the state. Okay? So, for example, if today in the protest, okay, that has to happen against the government, in light of the tragedy that has happened of the death of 3 children, in old Rajinder Nagar. Okay. And if the government knows that maybe this protest will become very problematic for us, okay, so what they will say? We will send some social workers on part of the government who will sit in those protests and act like they are part of the protest. But we will negotiate eventually with them on the terms that we want and get the protest to a halt. So state has very nicely used the voluntary members and stopped or shaped the protest as they want. Just understand it like that. Okay? So when we see many NGOs, they are the arms of whom? Of governments. Of political parties. So that they can able to control the resistance that has been offered by the masses by shaping the ground activities, by shaping the narratives. Okay? So civil society is like that safety valve for the state. Okay? And according to Gramsci, this civil society is the sphere where hegemony is being established. Okay? If consent is generated, good. If consent is not generated, state has police, state has military, which it will use in the protest site. So just think of it in this direction. Okay? Now, so in civil society, we understand various organizations like schools, churches, trade unions, okay? And we consider these associations as private and having a non-political characteristic, which means they are representing society, people's voice against the government. But even in fact, for Gramsci, they are not private or non-political. They have political, they shape ideas, okay? Now, for liberals, civil society is a sphere of freedom and state and civil society are separate. For Gramsci, civil society and state are not completely separable. They are closely interlinked and mutually reinforcing. So, I have given you an example of the protest and see how it works. Okay. So, it is in fact state in the embryonic form. Even when we say, when the evolution of Hegelian movement towards the state happens. So he says how the aspects of family, the aspects of civil society, everything will be getting embedded within the state. The negativities will go and the positivities of these spheres will remain in the state. That's why state is march of God on earth. Because all bad things will go and the state in its best form will remain for good. So he says it is what? State in embryonic form to manufacture consent and legitimacy. Alright. It is a site of hegemony where ideas and beliefs are shaped. Fine. So he talks of integral state. तो इंटीग्रल स्टेट का मतलब है कि स्टेट को सिर्फ पॉलिटिकल सोसाइटी और स्टेट से मत देखो, सिविल सोसाइटी भी स्टेट का ही पार्ट है. तो सिविल सोसाइटी में कंसेंट जनरेट होगी और अगर इन द सिविल सोसाइटी कंसेंट से काम नहीं चला, लीडरशिप से काम नहीं चला, इन्फ्लुएंस से काम नहीं चला और पेट्रनेज से काम नहीं चला, आइडियोलॉजी से काम नहीं चला, तो फिर हमारे पास तो पुलिस है, हमारे पास तो ब्यूरोक्रेसी है, हमारे पास तो मिलिट्री है. हम डोमिनेशन करेंगे, हम फोर्स यूज करेंगे एंड वी कैन डू व्हाटएवर in order to make our what? Exercise domination. All right. So that's what he talks about civil society. So where is, Marx undermines ideology as false consciousness. Right? True consciousness, according to Marx, will come when people will understand that the material conditions of their life are exploitative in nature. That's when there will be true consciousness that will be shaped. So Marx's concept, he does not give emphasis on the idea of ideology or concept of ideology. On the other hand, Gramsci says, अरे ideology ही तो use करती है. ये liberals, capitalists, they use ideas to dominate. Fine. So he says, it is very vital along with economic and political struggle. Ideology serves to cement and unify human practice. It plays a key role. Culture, ideas, belief, value, systems, ये सब क्या है? All this is part of ideology, है ना? Now, so it becomes common sense, right? Philosophy of popular masses that differentiated from the educated intellectuals. Now, his concept was distinctive and far more developed than that of his predecessors. So he says how ideology does not look like ideology. It looks like common sense and people naturally adopt it as part of their life. So then they will not challenge. They will question. If you make them question it, they'll be, no, this is normal. Giving rights is very important. Being rule of law is very important. Being liberal is very important. We don't question competition. Capitalism is based on competition. If you can compete good, why do you have to question capitalism? You question your own ability or merit and see whether you can also gain access and become a capitalist. So you'll never question, right? That's what he means when he says it becomes philosophy of the popular masses that differentiated them from educated intellectuals. Okay? Now, concept of state. So what is his concept? Yes, state deserves an independent analysis. It is part of the superstructure. State consists of machinery police, bureaucracy, military, government obviously, and the state is not state only of the highest structure, the third structure. State is integral state in Gramsci's view. Along with political society, civil society together are actually the way state dominates. All right, we'll see how. So he gives primacy to economic structure like Marx, obviously, but it is not, there should not be economic determinism. You have to give importance to thought, culture, ideology, hegemony, intellectuals, civil society. Now, so he says state is not simply reflection of base and state is a structure. Two types of state. One is a transparent state where civil society is weak and absent. On the other hand, exploitation of state is very evident because the civil society is weak and absent, and it is easy to bring revolution here. Okay. On the other hand, he says there is an opaque state where civil society is present and it acts like a cushion for the state. Okay? So hides the real nature of the state, and here bringing revolution is very, very difficult because state will use the civil society every time when there is protest against the structures of domination. Okay, that's why in opaque state, to establish counter hegemony, to bring a revolution challenge, it becomes very difficult. On the other hand, in a transparent state, it becomes easier. Okay, so that's why we call him also as a theoretician of superstructures. Now, so yes, this is all about Gramsci's various concepts, and we'll also study, okay, there is one more concept, that is the concept of historic block. So what is a historic block? So historic block means it is like a situation where the material as well as the cultural factors, all of them combine together, all the social forces are coming together, and then there is prevalence of a situation which challenges the existing structure. So to establish another hegemonic social structure. So material and social forces or cultural forces are used together by the dominant class. The proletariat will also have to establish, there'll be a situation where both these things will come together for them also, and they are able to challenge the domination. Okay, so this is where he talks of historic block. Fine, all objective and subjective forces coming together. Fine, so this is about Gramsci. All right, thank you so much. I hope it's a very easy thinker. You just have to understand the nuance in the terms because he uses them in a specific sense, and then I think life will be easy. Thank you so much.